Well, welcome everyone from whatever time zone you're joining from. I'm Robin Ewing and I'm going to host this evening's webinar. I'd like to start by acknowledging I'm joining today from Broken Hill, and I might mispronounce this, but I'm joining from Wilyakali country in far west New South Wales. The University of Sydney is on Gadigal land. If you want to, you can put where you're joining from in the chat. It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Pat Thomson and Dr Liam Maloy, who are going to be talking with us tonight. Just before we start, I want to encourage you all to join creativity in the arts, creativity in research, engaging the arts, transforming education, health and well-being. And if you haven't already seen some of the sorts of things that we do, please have a look at our YouTube channel and look at some of the webinars that we've curated recently. Let me just start with a very brief introduction to both Pat and Liam. I won't dwell on their very rich biographies because we're here to listen to them. But just let me say that Pat is a South Australian. She does hail from the land of Oz, but she's been Professor of Education in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at the University of Nottingham for quite some time now. And she's also the convener of the Centre for Research in Arts, Creativity and Literacy, a centre that aligns, I think, very much with CREATE in lots of ways. Pat's done an enormous amount of writing and research around interdisciplinary engagement in creative and, importantly, socially just learning and change. Lots of us know Pat's blog, Patter, which is wonderful. And I guess it's a labour of love, Pat, but we appreciate it. And, you know, there are lots of great research projects that you might like to have a look at. A lot of them have websites. For example, TAIL is one that I've been particularly interested in over the last few years. But as well, Pat is a jeweller of note, and I've really enjoyed looking at her jewellery on Facebook, etc. And Liam, Dr Liam Maloy, is a musician as well as an educator and researcher, and that really interests me as well, Liam. So I imagine that you're researching a lot, not only in terms of this particular project in arts-rich schools, but also in music and musical education and how important that is. And I know that you've both been engaged in this really quite massive investigation with school visits and surveys, and we're all looking forward to hearing about it. So over to you both.
Thanks very much, Robin. I don't think we need to say anything more about ourselves, and I'm just going to share my screen. But thank you for the invitation again to share our work. There is a little bit of overlap with the webinar we did a couple of weeks ago, which focused more on the research processes that we were using and the research design, and this is more oriented to the substantive content, but there is, as you understand, just a little bit of overlap between the two things. Okay, so let me just get this up. And Liam and I are going to be toggling between my presentation and his. He's going to interject a couple of times, or I'm going to cue him in a couple of times. We are going to be talking specifically about the work that we've been doing in primary schools and some of the things that we've been finding. We're in what is now, I guess, the beginning of the third year of the project. And I want to start with this video clip, which kind of sets the scene. It's quite English in its presentation and in its focus, but nevertheless, I think that it will be quite comprehensible to people in Australia who are used to, you know, NAPLAN, the importance of NAPLAN. You can see a kind of similar concern here, and just bear with the fact that this is the BBC.
This school is rated in the top 10% in England for improving children's performance in English and maths. It's in a deprived and diverse area. 98% of its pupils speak English as an additional language. So what's the secret? Music. In 2010, the government rated this school in Bradford as failing.
We were in special measures. The children were disengaged. Behaviour was a massive issue.
So under new leadership, the school decided to try something different. It embraced music in a big way. In 2013, it recruited its first music coordinator.
When I first started, the school was just coming out of special measures. There was virtually no music going on at all. Now, between 3 and 8 hours a week for every student. And then if they choose to come to all the lunchtime clubs and after school clubs, then they are accessing up to 8 hours of music with a specialist every week.
Crucially, Jimmy's lessons are all designed to be
very energetic and entertaining.
The lessons make sure children actively perform music, not just passively learn about it.
It's a myth that some children are musically talented and some are not. Every child is musically talented.
The school's eldest pupils are now in the top 2% in England for progress in English and maths.
It makes you enjoy, like, your day.
Enjoy school?
Yeah, it helps in other subjects as well.
There's a lot of pressure on schools to not do arts because they're scared that the results will be affected. Actually, music and arts are the bedrock of education success. You know, your results will go up using music and arts, not down.
So this kind of really sort of sets the scene, I think, for what we're interested in, which is what happens when schools have a curriculum which prioritises the arts. Now, this is a one school example, and maybe it's an exceptional school. So obviously one of the things that we wanted to do when we were looking at the research we might do in primary school is actually do some kind of survey of different sorts of research that address the question about, you know, what happens when children engage in the arts in a concentrated kind of way. And at home in England, there have been a recent set of randomised controlled trials looking at fairly short-term projects in a range of arts. And they were looking at whether these arts projects, only one of which was actually involved a writer working with students, but there was songwriting, there were different kinds of things, made a difference to literacy learning. And this, of course, is about, you know, testing out the proposition that the arts are have transferable learnings, and it's one of the propositions that people make to explain the kind of phenomena that Feversham represents. However, in this case, the meta-analysis over the suite of projects suggested that there hadn't been a literacy improvement, but in fact there also hadn't been a decline in literacy. So in other words, doing the arts hadn't detracted from what it was that the students were doing in literacy and numeracy. And the researchers concluded, and I think this was probably very disappointing for the people in the projects who suggested that, you know, they were going to improve literacy, but actually I think this is a perhaps more interesting and positive result than they might have first thought, because it does suggest that, you know, if you add the arts, as the head, as Navina at Feversham suggests, then it certainly doesn't negatively affect what else you're doing in terms of literacy and numeracy. But there's other research. For example, there's a Canadian study which looked at similar kinds of arts intervention programs, which actually also showed that the arts didn't undermine achievement in maths and language if you added arts. But they did actually show in the third year a small effect on student achievement in maths. But that project wasn't able to answer the question about whether this was because of transferable knowledge from the arts interventions into other subjects, or it was to do with dispositional changes in the children or generic skills that were underpinned all of the subjects, or it was something else to do with the children's kind of attitudes to school. But nevertheless, that study might suggest that more sustained engagement in the arts is likely to have, if there's going to be an effect in other subjects, that's what we think is important, then that may actually occur over time. Elpis' study, which is a very longitudinal study of music, and he's done, you know, the multiple papers about the sort of study, and following students from high school studying music into college, a large-scale study, and again suggests that, you know, there's no downside to studying music, and, you know, if in terms of college entrance in the US system, where entry to college is different than it is here, that, you know, it would be a mistake for schools to try and counsel students out of music thinking that their college entrance was going to be affected, when his study showed that in fact there's not much difference between the rates at which students applied to go to college, to the kinds of college that they went to, the rate at which they dropped out, and so on. And again, we've got this kind of notion that school music in this case doesn't disadvantage students. I mean, presumably they get stuff from the music itself, but that wasn't the point of this particular project. There are also, of course, evaluations of particular intervention programs, as well as these longitudinal studies that are done. And some of these are worth, I think, looking at. The Boston Public School Arts Expansion Program, I think, has been going for quite a long time. It's got quite a robust evaluation around it. And what that's found is positive effects on attendance, and higher levels of student school engagement, but these kind of mixed effects on test scores, which in, you know, core subject areas, which is what we'd be expecting. But the positive effects on attendance and higher levels of engagement are kind of consistent across a number of studies, including the meta-analysis that I and some colleagues conducted on the suite of creative partnerships research, also showed a similar kind of effect on attendance and what here is called school engagement. And this may in fact be more significant when we're actually thinking about why it is that the results at Feversham look the way that they do, because, you know, the kids at Feversham are coming to school more, and as they've actually suggested, they're more engaged. Another kind of intervention that we're tracking, or it's hard to tell whether actually this is still going, but I'm assuming that it is, but they haven't updated their website for a while. Turnaround Arts is it has taken the kind of, I think, the focus on the whole school and disadvantaged schools in particular, and has looked to support a range of schools with artists and connections with arts organisations, professional development for teachers, coaching of principals, looking at supporting community engagement, providing arts resources to schools as a way of supporting the schools engaged in school improvement. And they've certainly been able to document the kind of broader school improvement outcomes, which generally go beyond simply improving test scores, but looking at a range of schools, use a range of measures around school improvement, and their evaluations do show that this injection of effort in the arts does assist school improvement. So that's a kind of a whole school look as opposed to an individual student look, although clearly individual students are benefiting from what's happening in school improvement. But it points to there being something in the nature of what's happening in the school, as well as what's happening in the subject teaching as well. And another intervention program that's, I think, worth tracking is what's been happening in Seattle, where they've been looking at, we'd be pretty familiar with this, I think, with, you know, this kind of suite of 21st century skills. And they've been monitoring how children are improving in this kind of suite of what, you know, Bill Lucas and Guy Claxton would call, you know, creative dispositions. And it's certainly, when we did the meta-analysis of creative partnerships, it was absolutely clear after 11 years of that program, and using a kind of patchwork approach to evidence analysis that's accepted here as being a legitimate form of review, and is used in the medical practitioner, by medical practitioners, researchers, for example. But certainly there's enough research emerged from creative partnerships to suggest that, you know, this was absolutely a kind of bedrock of the change that happened. Unfortunately, creative partnerships missed a trick in that they really didn't set it up as a longitudinal, and it could have been set up as a longitudinal to actually track children all the way through the 11 years of the funded program, because some children were in both primary and secondary schools where there were very intensive kind of interventions, and most of this was, of course, with there were a few creative practitioners that were not artists, but by and large this was actually an arts program. But, you know, there are these kind of, and you'd be familiar with the kind of work that's going on in Wales and Scotland, and creative partnerships do around the world, and some work being done in Australia as well. I guess our interest is primarily in the arts as opposed to creativity, and I think that's a longer conversation about how these things overlap and how they might be different. And I guess we understand the arts as being a field with multiple disciplines, and so and a core part of the curriculum, as opposed to a cross-curriculum emphasis. This was something that the Durham Commission into Creativity acknowledged for the first time in the English context, that the two things can't be simply conflated. I think our interest is very much in the kind of the curriculum, what kids actually get in that part of the curriculum and what it can do. And so in a way, we're kind of less interested in the Seattle program and more interested in the Boston program and some of the other research that's going on in the arts. And that's just our focus at this point in time, although I can and certainly will argue at some point about why cultural education is crucial in the 21st century. And I think the piece of research that, you know, we've drawn on most has been James Catterall's study, the National Education Longitudinal Study, which looked at 12,000 students over 12 years. He developed a scale of arts richness and was able to look at the educational pathways of a range of students, including low-income students, and compare them with students, low-income students in arts-rich schools, low-income students in non-arts-rich schools, and students in other income brackets. And you know, his big kind of finding is that low-income students who'd attended arts-rich schools are more likely to be in further or higher education than those who weren't in arts-rich schools, and are more likely to be studying for a BA than students in non-arts rich schools. And they're also, and this is consistent across some of the longitudinal studies and also in our own research, 50% more likely to be involved in voluntary civic activities than the national average. We would argue, I think, and have argued elsewhere, but we would argue that this is to do with the emphasis that the arts curriculum places on, you know, what is called the kind of wide awakeness to the world, the kind of connection with the world of finding and working with cultures generally. And Carroll argues that it's very hard to find evidence among any other kind of intervention program looking at disadvantaged students. It's hard to find another intervention which is as significant as the arts rich school. And to go back to Feversham, I think this leaves us with an explanation. What's going on, and can we work out why it is that arts rich schools and arts programs support children from families who don't have as much money and as much access to cultural assets, the elite cultural assets? Then, you know, how are we going to explain this? Carroll argues that it's to do with the schools having, and we bear this in mind in relation to the school improvement intervention that's going on. Carroll suggests that arts-rich schools create a climate for achievement, as well as kind of pedagogies, what he calls instructional practices, that teachers use that are more likely to support and scaffold students' learning. And it's what he calls a beneficial climate for achievement, what other American researchers might relate to opportunity to learn standards, for example. And he talks as well about the coherent arts-based identity, because there's something here to do with not only with school culture, but also what it is that teachers know how to do and do. So it may not be actually about transferable learning by students. It may in fact be to do with pedagogical approaches that are taken up across the school, at least in part. And this has been, I guess, his view of the importance of the school, the climate, and the pedagogical approaches is supported by other programs, for example, the A+ Schools program and the Ford Foundation's Arts Education program, who've gone a little further in talking about what the positive and inclusive school ethos actually is, and how the coherence of identity is actually created. So this is, I guess, by way of saying that, you know, we're not the only people interested in this. There's other work that's important. There's work that we're drawing on, and questions that are raised in some of these projects that we've been trying to pursue. Robin mentioned the TAIL study. I'm not going to talk a lot about this. The previous piece of research we did before the Researching Arts in Primary Schools was a 3-year project with 30 secondary schools. It's produced a lot of data, particularly from students, but very rich case studies. And in particular, we argued in that project that what we saw was, and here you can see us trying to unpack what's this arts richness, what's this conducive school climate, what are these instructional practices, how are they composed, that, you know, we were able to talk about we've taken the notion of a school ecology, which is common in the school change literature, has been used in the school change literatures for 40 or 50 years, that, you know, that you can't pull one thing out and say it's this. You can't pull a project out or a teaching approach or whatever and say it's this. It's a very complex kind of mix of things. So it is about the kinds of approaches that people would take when they're thinking about school improvement. They're thinking about how they're going to manage all the various things involved in changing a school. It is certainly about broad and balanced curriculum. It's certainly about extension activities. It's about the engagement of active engagement of school leaders. It's about the things that they do to ensure that the arts are integral to the school's identity and the way that the school communicates with its publics. It's certainly about these arts broker teachers who are heavily involved in the arts themselves, who embody and live what it means to be culturally engaged and work to support their students to be culturally engaged. And it is about the kind of particular pedagogies that they use, which in general are challenging, sustained, intellectually demanding, as well as being kind of enjoyable. Students associated them with the kinds of categories that we might think about in relation to the 6,000 responses that we got from students, are related to, their sense of self-belief, their well-being, their sense of agency, the kinds of horizons of possibility, what Bourdieu called, the possibles that were made available to them through the arts. And important in all of this was a kind of commitment to ongoing professional development. And we talked about and our data allowed us to see a similar kind of out-of-school engagement with the arts that some of the other projects, Catterall and Elpis research also talked about, that same kind of engagement that teachers had, they were also supporting students to have at a greater level than the national average. And we've talked about that as cultural citizenship, and the book from the project, which will be out early next year, does elaborate that. I just want to, for a minute, just talk about introduce the Researching Arts in Primary School project, and Liam's going to take you on a couple of school visits as we go through this. But we were particularly interested in, how it is that primary schools kind of lay the foundations for arts, where the arts are, in theory, in England, part of a broad and balanced curriculum, but we know that's not, we know that that's not evenly practiced across the country, let's say that. And so we started with a kind of short list of 186 schools, who we invited to do a survey, and I'll talk about survey in a minute. And in the end, we've got 40 case study schools. Liam's completed visits, a first round of visits to 40 primary schools during COVID, which is of course still going on. And he's now started on the next round of case study visits to 22 schools, which we've selected from the 40, and we're just in the process of finalising the 22 comparator schools, and we're going to survey the children and teachers about their experiences in arts-rich schools and schools which have other priorities. And we're able to do that because assuming that the other schools agree, which is not a done deal, of course, by in any sense of the word, but the Education Endowment Foundation does produce a list of comparator schools for every school in the country is within a family of like schools, and so it's possible for anybody, including schools, to the schools themselves, who are encouraged to identify their comparator schools. So the RAPS project. Liam, why don't you take us on a little tour to one of the schools and give us an introduction?
So I'm going to talk you through a school that I visited last week. Obviously, for the second time, I visited them last year. So this is Kelsall Primary in Cheshire, which is in the northwest of England. Nearest city is Chester, a historic city with Roman origins. The school is rural, it's in a village, looks immediately over green fields, hills, farms, has about 240 students, and in terms of achievement, it is well above average in terms of maths, reading and writing. As Pat's described a little bit, this is Kelsall's display as you walk in of their what they call the connected curriculum. So there's lots of detail on here, lots of QR codes, lots of references to big ideas, different books, different ways of thinking, different partnerships that they're involved with, but actively seeking intellectual stimulation for their senior leaders, for their teachers, and clearly this is public facing. So lots going on. Story House is a local theatre that they're involved with, and Slice is a network of senior leaders that are interested in arts education. There's different references, lots of things on here, but as you can see, some of the books that they buy in quantity, give them out to their teachers about creative thinking, especially. So Kelsall hook their curriculum around books. So from the earliest years to year 6, the eldest children, they hook everything around books. And the head and the arts lead have a sort of double act going on. They were both musicians. One of them still is a fairly active musician. Neither had a background in the visual arts when they started, and they both developed their visual arts skills, ethos and pedagogy in their 1 and 2 decades at the school. What you're seeing here is the arts lead's work, which sits inside the art studio. The school has developed something of an idiosyncratic semi-abstract style, but with extensive use of sketching and reworking, building basic skills from the earliest years, and giving the students lots of freedom, independence and confidence in their artwork with a sense of joy and play and a no mistakes philosophy. I picked all of these up from interviewing the arts leads and the heads. So the arts lead said semi-abstraction avoids many of the frustrations that students encounter when they strive for realism, I should say, and a closely copied photographic approach. They'll always need to be rubbing out. So you can see some of the students' work here, some tiles, these are ceramic. This is their arts studio, as they call it. So big room, nice and busy, but it's also used as the arts lead studio. He uses it on the weekends, he uses it after school. This is his own work. Here we go. His work is displayed alongside the students' work. They do, and both the arts lead and the head have written or self-published books of art and regularly do so, leave them around the school for people to pick up and look at. But lots of work in the studio, piles of stuff, working in this kind of photographic but semi-abstract style, lots of impressive work, individual rather than cookie cutter responses, different techniques, different portraiture. Remember, these are all primary students. So yeah, well-used art room, piles of resources in their art store. They go big on Henry Moore, especially. It's a big, the arts leader is a big fan of Henry Moore, so they do a lot of work around Henry Moore. Year 5, the Iron Man. Anthony Gormley is another artist that they enjoy, so they do a lot of work around sculptural things. So in other words, relatively local British artist. This is a piece of work they did around the Blitz in the style of Guernica, but these are year 4 students, so these are aged 9 or 10. So interesting subject matter, I guess. They have sorry, that was my timer. They have an outdoor area they call Camp Curiosity, so lots of extensive outdoor space. This is in a leafy rural area. Outdoor stage, top right, for performances. They have huge mural they're turning into something of a room 13, or they're calling it an area 13, where students can create murals each term, take some photographs, make some books, and then it'll be whitewashed again. Lots of money for decking. This No Outsiders bus is from the Story House, the local theatre, and that's the leavers bench on the right. So a whole bench to commemorate the leaving students. So that's Kelsall in a nutshell.
I want to go on to talk about the survey of the 76 schools and what it is that we learned about arts-rich schools from surveying these 76. And there were a range of schools around the country, but also different types of schools. And, I don't have time to explain these, but you'd understand that the English school system now consists of several different types of schools that are governed in different ways. And what we needed to do was to make sure that we had representation from all of them. This is slightly different from the national average. The national average, there are still more local authority primary schools than 50%. It's more like about 2/3 across the nation, but we're happy that we've got a reasonable kind of representation of the types of schools that there are across the country. It's not a representative sample. It was, entirely voluntary, and it's really purposeful because it's about their arts richness. We wanted to know what in the first instance, what arts rich actually meant, and we can pursue questions of how governance relates to the arts richness through the case studies. We asked the schools how important they thought arts subjects were. And, not surprisingly, actually, we were surprised to see that there was one that thought the arts were less important than other subjects. But we were equally surprised to see that, over 16 of them, so just over 20%, so about, a fifth of them actually thought that the arts were more important than other subjects, but most of them thought that the arts were equally important. So there was a strong commitment to parity between the arts subjects and other subjects. And then, but of course, it's easy to pay lip service to saying the arts subjects are equally important. So what we primarily wanted to know in the survey is, what do they actually do? Well, what we can see is that 100% of them teach art and 100% of them teach music to every child in the school. We can see that design and technology is in most of them, creative writing's in most of them, dance is in most of them, dramas in a fair few, and we can go right down to kind of photography, which is, much less practiced, and some of the other art forms, of course, that they all had a few sort of idiosyncrasies, but we can see really that the bedrock of an arts-rich school is art, music, design, technology, and creative writing or literature, that these are the things that these schools do. But of course, just saying they do them might mean, that they do them once in a year. Maybe all schools could say, oh, yes, we do art and music. So we also asked them how many of them taught these subjects all year. And what we can see is that 90% of the schools in the survey teach music and art all year, every year, to every child. So, this is when you see Feversham saying 3 hours of music per week. It's that kind of offer that we're actually talking about. None of them teach music or art occasionally, in other words, for a term or less. And we can so you can see that, the fairly substantial kind of commitment. You can see that creative writing increases going into upper primary, drama increases going into upper primary, whereas dance there's a kind of little difference, not much of it, not statistically significant difference, but older children are being given generally a more varied kind of set of experiences than younger children in the school, which is very much around this core of music, art, creative writing, and for about half the schools, drama as well. So that gives us a pretty good basis. Yes, it is only 76 schools, but nobody's asked schools before who are arts rich what they actually do. And I think we can feel pretty confident in saying that if you're an arts rich school, has this kind of core. It's the consistent offer of these kind of core arts, the arts subjects to all children every year, all year. Which we think is important. And now I'm going to hand over to Liam for another little school visit.
Okay, so this is Leamington Community Primary School in Liverpool, again, visited last week for the second time. It's a very different school. It's still in the northwest of England, but it's obviously in Liverpool. It's in a suburb of Liverpool called Norris Green. It's about 4.5 miles away from the city. It does have a culturally rich background. Members of Frankie Goes to Hollywood, A Flock of Seagulls, Echo and the Bunnymen, and a Doctor Who are all from Leamington, as well as other people that are associated with the media. It's twice as large as Kelsord, approximately, but again has above average achievements in reading, writing and maths. They do have very high level of special educational needs and disability. And as you can see, this school is surrounded on all 4 sides by spiky fences, previously barbed wire. They have plastic windows so they don't get smashed. They have people that have tried to burn the school down regularly, people trying to get on the roof. It's a highly deprived area. But this is their art room, very different style, obviously showing the diversity of approaches of arts richness, very neat and everything packed away, lovely clean white surfaces. This is a brand new art room as well, been extended. They have links with the Blue Coat Gallery in Liverpool, and they have an outreach person from Blue Coat one day a week. And they set up schemes so they can provide free entry, free transport from Norris Green into town, half-term projects, even providing food and things like that to get families and children into town, into the gallery. There is a very poor uptake. They're still trying. It's an ongoing project, but this is some of the work that they produce with the Blue Coat. I stayed for an after-school club last year with an artist called Bruce Asbestos. He has links with the Blue Coat. So I stayed with their art council students in the art room. Bruce is on Zoom. He's in Nottingham. He creates huge inflatable sculptural work, I guess. So they were after a collaborative design for a sculpture that the children could make and place in their playground, something akin to this. This is a mock-up of the Blue Coat and the pieces. And I visited the Blue Coat, and he was in the process of assembling this thing a couple of weeks later in the Blue Coat, so you get a sense of what he does. So the children worked over a number of weeks creating designs and models. As you can see, the bottom right one is reference to the very local Aintree racecourse, which is near Norris Green, in fact. So children worked, Bruce worked with them, giving them some ideas, and it went back and forth. And they eventually ended up with this, which is what I saw last week. So not inflatable, but fiberglass. And this now sits in their playground. They go big on what they call narrative immersion. So there's lots of spaces around the school which create kind of certain environments, certain fantasy, certain immersive experience to do with the sea or space or different spaces around. I did visit when I was there last year. I was actually in Narnia, so they dressed up one of the classrooms as Narnia. So there's lots of props, costume, storytelling, characterization to stimulate emotion and imagination. That led the children off into another room and got them ready with ice packs and snowflakes. Meanwhile, somebody was dressing up their own classroom with furry coats and on all sorts of things, hanging them in the doorway. So when they came back in, they were all surprised and in this immersive environment. So, but it was the very start of a project, which was about a piece of literature. They went on to do about the book, The Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe. So And again, last year I saw the bus. Head teacher just bought a bus last year, which you see on the left. Last week I saw it. They'd painted it white. That's the head teacher. We're just about to visit inside the bus. So again, last year the bus just looked like a bus. This year, it's a narrative, immersive space. This is the upstairs, no windows, all blocked out with space theme. We've got Bluetooth speakers in there, which the head teacher enjoyed playing me at high volume to create a kind of space environment. There's toys and space things. But downstairs has been converted into really a kitchen, I suppose, with washing machines, tumble dryers, microwave, cooking facilities. This facility is specifically aimed at parents. As a community school, they're trying to engage with parents at high levels of poverty, children coming to school without food, without clothing. So these are spaces that the parents can access, and meeting spaces so they can meet with community workers. They have what they call a reading cafe on site, which also is providing drinks and food for parents. This is more than a food bank as well. This is on site. This is providing provisions and physical things that parents might need, nappies and pushchairs and clothing. And this is staffed by 2 full-time members of staff on site just to provide for the children. Lastly, the children have been involved in what's called the World Reimagine project. So these big globes have been, as a white globe had been distributed around schools in 6 UK cities. The children were given the white globe, they designed and decorated it, and then they were displayed in different locations across Liverpool. As you can see, the children that designed it with a crack in the globe, they'd put the sticking plaster on it, lots of different hands in different colors, flags of the world. And this one was displayed in the FACT Picture House and Gallery, which I visited, which is a contemporary art gallery. And then all the globes came together at the very large and prestigious St. George's Hall for a big cross-school celebration and exhibition. And then the globes were being returned to the school, which the art teacher took place on the flat roof of the art room with lots of lights on it so that it can be seen across the community. They have extensive provision for obviously visual arts and performing arts. So that these are their arts leads. Sorry, I'm looking at the picture, which is where they do all the performing arts, but they do have lots of separate specific arts leads. They bring productions in. They bring a pantomime in. They bring Shakespeare, reduced Shakespeare productions in. And so, yeah, big, do dance competitions, have dance leaders, and lots of colourful artwork all around the school. So that's, again, Leamington Community Primary School in Liverpool.
Thanks, Liam. And I guess we particularly wanted to show you the contrast, but also perhaps say something about the situation in England at the moment where, you know, large numbers of children are hungry. The situation with poverty and children in this country is truly shocking. Australians would be just appalled, I think, really, to see how things are in this school. And you can see the links that schools in disadvantaged communities are going to now, becoming food banks, becoming repositories for all kinds of things that parents need. And in many ways, the COVID exacerbated the situation where in many communities, not only in rural areas, but, you know, in cities as well, inner cities, poor housing estates, the school is the last public service standing. Okay, so let me just go on and do a quick roundup of some emerging insights. I mean, even just seeing those 2 schools, I hope that you can see that, you know, there's no one best model of an arts-rich school, although we can see the patterns that there are in the curriculum. So we can see a kind of architecture, if you like, which is common, but what this actually looks like on the ground is very different. And Chris and I often talk about vernacular change and vernacular improvement, which is how schools take up the kind of local that surrounds them and actually use that as part of the school. But they've all got the school improvement process, but they've all got their own histories, they've got distinctive communities, they've got distinctive identities that they develop, and distinctive ways of doing the arts and doing school change. What we're working on now is really looking at doing more about what the key patterns are of the primary arts rich ecology, and obviously going on to compare these with arts average and arts poor schools and schools that have got other priorities. How does, you know, what they're doing, our schools do that's different. I think we can see, and I want to talk about some of the other kind of emerging patterns now as well, but we're really just to say that we're working on all of them. We can, and I hope we've demonstrated to you that, you know, one of the key things about the schools is that the children do amazing work and they're supported to do amazing work. Teachers have a strong sense of, you know, what's possible, and basically expect all children to be able to participate. And we think this is important because I think, as I said in the last presentation, this is a kind of, it really shows what children can do, all children can do, if you actually do provide them with the wherewithal to do it. What we're working on really now is understanding how the schools scope and pace their kind of arts curriculum and how they monitor and assess progress. We're really wanting to be able to say something much more substantial about the practices of curriculum design and assessment practice in the schools, and how it is that the teachers actually get the children, support the children to do this quality of work. As we've suggested, the arts rich schools all have at least one specialist teacher. Many have a lot more. I didn't show you, but the survey did show the number of specialist teachers that there were in arts rich schools, and I think that's one of the patterns, is that the schools have sought out specialist support, and the specialists have, I mean, what, you know, we educators would call, you know, pretty substantive pedagogic content knowledge, and many of them have got arts practices of their own, as Liam sort of suggested at Kelsall, and many of them actually work outside their school, doing professional development with other teachers, not only locally but, you know, nationally. But the specialists work differently in different schools. I mean, you know, Jimmy Rotherham doesn't cover every music lesson in the school. There are other teachers in the school. There are also, you know, classroom, and also, you know, his area is music. There are other specialist teachers in the school, but there are also classroom teachers have to take up some of the generalist music teaching and other arts subject teaching as well. We're interested in now trying to see the pattern in each of the schools that we're in. So in each of the 40 schools, part of our analysis now is going to be a much more detailed understanding of how it is that these specialist and generalist teachers work together. But we're also, in the work that we're doing with comparator schools, we're also interested in looking at the difference between generalist teachers in arts rich schools and generalist teachers in schools where the arts are not a priority. And the research suggests to us that generalist teachers often, you know, don't have the background. They suffer from a kind of lack of confidence. They spend a lot of time surfing the internet looking for resources without actually having a clear set of criteria about how they're going to make choices. So we really want to dig into this. It's too early for us to be able to say anything comprehensive about this, but we know it's an issue, and we've got a couple of surveys to do that we hope are going to help us say something helpful in relation to the comparison. There's the schools pay a lot of attention to how, I guess, as Malaguzzi would have said, how it is that the environment can be the teacher. And the schools do very different things in relation to how they look, and you could see it just in the two examples that Liam showed you from, a school where there are these kind of immersive environments to schools where there are kind of old art school kind of environments and music studios. But there are schools which have very domestic kind of spaces. They use a lot of domestic furniture. Schools which are very kind of Nordic really in their approach, a lot of kind of wood and living plants, but they've all thought about that, and we're interested in how schools make the decisions about what kind of learning environment is important. We note not all of them have specialist facilities, some of them do, but they've all managed to create this kind of mood in the school. When you're in the school that it's kind of an artsy school, and you can feel the difference. And the outside seems to be important in that for a number of the schools, although clearly it's also the case in schools where they don't have the advantage of even much of the schoolyard. But we're interested in pursuing the question of the intellectual resources that schools draw on for the curriculum, but also in designing the environment, and how it is that this supports the kind of development of what they understand education to be, what they understand teaching and learning to be. So in other words, what philosophy of education they've got, how is this manifest in the environment as well as in the curriculum and teaching approaches. We're obviously interested in the formation of school identity, and we've noted in the arts-rich schools that they generally have a cluster of priorities in their school improvement plan, and might be to do with rights respecting, it might be philosophy for children, it might be to do with particular views of citizenship, it might be to do with the environment, might be to do with STEAM and STEM education, putting the arts together. But there's a kind of a coherence about the way in which these things are brought together, which allows the individual projects that get done to actually have something to rest on. So, one of the differences I think we can see between our experience in other programs where there have been a set of projects that the schools do, and what happens in the arts-rich schools is that it's the curriculum core forms a kind of, the arts curriculum core forms a kind of foundation on which projects like those globes can actually happen. But the globes are not an isolated kind of incident or the example of arts. They are something that happens as an extension to the bedrock curriculum, and I think that's really important, and it's part of the approach to school improvement, which we also hope to unpack by the end of the year and say something more sensible about, and of course connects us back to that early research that I talked about in relation to school improvement. I've already talked about the kind of vernacular and the local, the arts provide a kind of avenue through which connections to the local community can be made, not simply in terms of relationships and organisations coming in and out, but also the way in which the curriculum is designed. So we've got a number of schools who are doing projects very much related to their particular area, to artists in their area, to events in their area, to the local landscape. And so it's part, that's part of forming that distinctiveness of this place, which is reflected not only in the symbolic regimes in the school, but also in the actual curriculum, as well as their kind of web of connections that they have, these kind of bonds that they have with artists and arts organisations. And we want to suggest that there's this kind of wide awakeness that happens, which is a wide awakeness to the local area, which is where the school has some permeability, you know, kind of notion that Anne Hust-Dyson talks about, that kind of permeability of the school. But there's also, you know, what, you know, some of the literature calls the kind of omnivore attitude to the arts. So it's not simply about elite arts or high arts, nor is it simply about popular arts, nor is it simply about local arts. It's actually about all arts. So there's a very, if you like, this kind of what Nick Stevenson, one of our colleagues at Nottingham, calls a cosmopolitan orientation to cultural education. And we're interested in thinking more about how this kind of place-basedness, these kinds of bonds that schools develop, and this kind of cosmopolitanism and the vernacular come together. So we're hoping to be able to say something. That's the kind of core to the identity question, we suspect. And the other thing that we notice is the kind of leadership, the function of the leadership in the school, which is always in kind of a dialogic relationship with the arts lead. So as you'd expect, if the arts are part of a school improvement process, you'd expect that school leaders would be taking quite an active and strong interest in what happens. The other thing that we'd say is that there's kind of a tendency to perhaps more democratic forms of decision making, with students having some involvement in particular themes. We need to pursue this a little further, but it appears to us in the interviews that teachers and the arts leads all feel able to influence what happens in the school, and that's not something that you would necessarily find in all schools, that kind of capacity, that sense of agency that the teachers themselves, the arts leads themselves, have about the direction that the arts is taking in the school. We're interested in how schools sustain that, how this arts richness changes over time, and what happens when people leave and when new people come in. And we've got a few examples of that in the group of schools that we're looking at the moment. And, you know, we kind of are interested in that, in something that doesn't ossify. It may in fact be constant. You know, Kelsall's an example, I think, of a school where there's a strong core of continuity, but there's also change at the same time. So how is it that they actually manage that kind of process, so that they don't, you know, start the slippery slide down of it all becoming predictable and losing an effect. So that's where we're going to finish, and I'm just going to leave you with one more video clip. This is again of a school which is has a strong commitment to music. They have a number of associations with different organisations, and this is again, I think, pretty well all of their senior school students, upper primary students who've been working with a composer in residence, which has been made something which has been made available to them through their connection with the arts organisation, and it's Horfield Primary School.
All is quiet and all is calm. The whispering water listens, shining, shimmering, full of charm. The tranquility listens, but now the water is not so good. Creatures escape, passing mortals for food. Dolphins, whales, English. Should be on a shopping list. Let's see it's rubbish. Dolphins and whales, not rubbish and plastic, but more rules and checks. The monster race is plastic balls. Tiny cascading through the waves. It's plastic beasts, rubbles and rolls. Shirking fish who can't be safe are beautiful. Turquoise sea, once was a picture of tranquility. Fossils, bags and so much waste are hiding the beauty of that place. Plastic bags like jellyfish should be on a shopping list. The sea is rubbish, dolphins and whales, not rubbish and plastic, but more rules and checks. Strange scenery jungles, cities of colorful corals, oceans of wonders, trees or trees. Plastic pollution, we need a solution. Please don't see us like jellyfish. Surely on the shores to be honest. It's only things that make us rubbish and plastic outside. Please don't see us like jellyfish. Surely on the shores to be honest. It's only things that make us rubbish and plastic
Well, thank you so much, Pat and Liam. It was such a brilliant and, encouraging in so many ways, both presentation, but the research itself is just so important, I think. And I, for one, will be very keen to continue to follow as you delve deeper into all of your findings and look at those great key questions that you've asked. We've probably got time just to have one or two questions, and I know Pam has one. Pam, would you like to ask your question, make your comment?
Hi. Once again, the brilliance of Pat Thomson and her research associates, friends, colleagues. Liam, beautiful. I mean, really it performed, the inextricable connectedness of research, practice and theory. You just bring them together. They're not separate. And these schools, you always tell, not just a beautiful, bright and happy story. They're the realities, the struggle, the unprecedented pain of societies at the moment, underpinning all of this as a elite motive. And really appreciated what you did this morning. I put it in the chat, a kind of stream of consciousness. I just had to get a few things out. I wasn't sure if I could stay for this long. And so I'm gonna, maybe it's the key point I wanted to question, whether Bourdieu actually and his binaries of structure and field just doesn't do it now, in terms of social theory, because society has changed so much. And while I am a bit immersed in posthumanism and Karen Barrad's new materialities, and you'll see that language in my questions, I wonder what your thoughts are about what is this, it's really telling us something new, about schooling and education, and the extent to which exuding from all of your gorgeous images and was this sort of sense of belonging. And I don't know whether I was reading into it just being romantic. I don't think so. The artwork, the expression, the sense of community, how you spoke of those communities and the cultural responsiveness. To what extent did you see evidence of belonging? You know, when you said you went into these schools and there was each one is another planet, but is it the one thing that they share is a sense of belonging? And the second question to that is, what was the role of the arts in transforming the school? Or is that not the case at all? The arts were always there, so the role of the arts in transforming and the sense of belonging. Thank you so much.
I think
I wonder if you could, when I go to the doctor and they say you need to take vitamins and zinc and all this stuff, I want to have a tablet of Pat Thomson, please. Pat Thomson tablets.
I think one of the things that we saw in creative partnerships, and actually Chris and I were having a conversation about this just yesterday, so how do you explain kids coming to school more? So the kids say to you, I enjoy school more, and people talk about the zeitgeist, they talk about the school identity, whatever. And, there's some old nasty psych theory about attachment, which is to do with parents and children. But there's a kind of version of something like that. And Chris and I haven't got a clue what to call this, but it's the same thing that you're trying to get at, which is where the kids do feel part of the school. That's why they come. And we think this is, just to hypothesize, peculiar word to use, but never mind, just to talk about our kind of sense of it, our hunch at the moment, is that it's actually this, which, like they're in the art subjects. They love them, they do well in them, they've got a sense of who they are, they've got this sense of being stretched, of achieving whatever. And that keeps them hanging in school. And actually it can give them a pathway through all the way through school. But with that, because of this wide awakeness to the world, but also because of the core of the way it touches and allows them to become and be at the same time, the being and becoming, or the being in formation, or the, however we want to talk about it, that's also part of that. I don't think we can explain it at the moment, but I think we're onto the same, and we've been onto the same thing for, I think, a while in this work without being able to explain what it is. And I think absolutely Bourdieu doesn't do it, but I don't think anybody else does it either, actually. But there is something about this school is important, this education is important, I'm important in this, I can do this stuff, that is very core to that kind of social justice difference that is made through these schools. I don't know what else to say about that, really. And I don't think we know the answer to how much was the arts involved in transformation. We've certainly got examples of schools like Feversham, like Allenscroft and Billesley in Birmingham. Joe Clifton, who's the head there, would be the first person to say, who was the head there. She's now moved into the Elliott Trust, but she would be the first person to say, as did Naveen at Feversham, that the arts were the change. Yeah. That's what they changed. They kept on plugging away at the same things, drilling and skilling the maths and phonics and graphemes and all of that. All that still all goes on, but actually it's the music and the art which made the difference, switched the keys.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. I'm sure we all would.
Well, how we convince other people.
Well, I think that is, the really important question. And obviously we have to keep working at that and working together to find the answer, to convince the powers that be that every school needs to be an arts-rich school. and I love how you demonstrate that it isn't a recipe. They're not all the same.
Yeah.
They're unique, just as the teachers and the children and the parents and caregivers are unique. So I think we watch this space and perhaps, you know, perhaps we take that question, Pat, you know, about what we can do collegially to try and get this really powerful research heard where it needs to be heard, you know, where I don't have the answer to how we can convince the policymakers.
I mean, some of it's within the profession, isn't it? It's not outside.
Well,
it's absolutely within the profession. I mean,
right.
Chris was also telling me she's, you know, was having a conversation a few days ago with someone who absolutely, I mean, who's a key figure in a very large multi-academy trust, who refused to acknowledge that there was any knowledge in visual art. It was just playing with paints, you know.
Yeah, that's right. We've still got a lot of work to do.
Long way to go, yeah.
Long way to go. But the exciting thing is, you know, I think we do have, you know, a growing mass. And I think we have to not lose hope and not lose heart, you know, but keep working on this. So thank you both so much. As Pam says, absolutely brilliant research. And fabulous presentation. I love the way you put it together with those snapshots. It was wonderful. And let's keep talking.
Yeah, we will.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining tonight.
Yeah.
I know lots of other people will listen to the recording, watch the recording, but let's keep talking about arts-rich schools and how we can change the perceptions, you know, more universally, if you like. Okay. Thanks, everyone.